Namaste. This is Abhinav Prakash. Welcome to my video blog. We have been reading a lot these days about how the democracy is under threat in India and how there is this creeping authoritarianism which is threatening to undo what the real India is all about. Well, there is nothing new about these allegations against India. We have been listening to them since 1947, although the intensity of such allegations has really gone up in the last couple of years. So while I think that the left and the liberal really don't have anything new to offer to our understanding and the analysis of what is happening in India, apart from this, usual cliche of fascism and authoritarianism and democracy and the threat, we really do need to have some serious analysis as to what is happening in India at the moment. Why do we have these protests which are happening at regular frequency in India over the last couple of years? It's not just about CAA or the farmers' protest, but you have a lot of protests going on in India, both at the national level and at the state level. And I think that this has something to do with how India is trying to change the course of its own history. Now, history is important, people, and it is a matter of deep concern that in India we really do not have a proper history of India written by Indians. And why I'm saying so? If you look at the history writing in India by either by the left wing or the so-called right wing, there is too much of history, very little of archaeology and evidences. The history of India is such badly written piece of work that we really don't know what we are talking about. And the reason is that we have never invested in the prime resources, we have never invested in the archaeology, so we really don't know what was happening, let's say, 2000 years back. And this is unlike the Egyptians or the Roman, Greek, or the Chinese history. So while we have a limitation of our knowledge regarding ancient Indian history, and by ancient Indian history, I mean not just the historical period, that is when you have the history writing available, but also the prehistoric period. Because what happened in 5000 BCE or 7000 BCE or 8000 BCE is also extremely important as to what our future trajectory is. But let's base our analysis on the available information about the Indian history and specifically the political history of India. When we look at the ancient history of India, we find a very interesting phenomena. And the phenomena is that unlike China, India never has been a strong state. So look at China. Chinese history is like you have a dynasty, at least since the time of the Qin. You have a dynastic rule of couple of hundred of years, a very strong centralized state in which emperors command absolute power and they are able to execute their will at the grassroots level. And then you will have 150 years of chaos when the dynasty collapses, and then again a new dynasty will come and take over, and you will have this 300 years of, let's say, more or less a stable rule. In India, it is the opposite. You will have, let's say, 100 years of an imperial rule where you will have a large state, a centralized, a unified Indian state ruling over large parts of the Indian subcontinent. And then you will have 300 years of fragmentation before another dynasty comes up and rules for 150 years. And that is a very important feature of the Indian history, that we have lacked a strong state, a unified state for much of our history. That means our polity has evolved in a very different manner over past several millennia. Another important point about the Indian state, if you just notice about, let's say, the Guptas or the Mauryans or the other Indian dynasties, is that they were all what we call low-end state. Now you have high-end state and the low-end state. High-end states are like, let's say, you have Egypt, ancient Egypt. where there's a very strong central rule. You have a very strong central bureaucracy. You are able to collect taxes from the people. That means you know who your people are, that you have proper census being done. You have a professional standing army. Basically, you have a state which is very well functioning state at the local level and which can be controlled easily from the central level. Whereas the low end states are the one, let's say, where you have a Chakravarti Samrat, emperor, but the emperor is not ruling all the parts of its empire directly. That is, you do not have a central bureaucracy covering the entire area of the empire. Instead, you have these regional satraps who are basically independent kings who were conquered by the emperor, and the emperor now extracts tribute for them from them. So these satraps now basically do what? They owe their allegiance to the emperor. They provide him with the military services. They provide him with resources and tributes, but no direct rule by the central authority. And this is a low-end state. You do not have a central bureaucracy which covers the entire empire. The ability of the central rule is very weak in influencing the grassroots level institutions in the empire, and of course the daily lives of the masses outside the big capital cities or the big metropolitan center goes undisturbed. Doesn't matter what the emperor is doing. Now this is very unlike the high-end state where what the pharaoh is doing or what the emperor with the mandate of heaven is doing in China. That really does have a very strong impact at the local level. And now this is how India has been for much of its existence. That our polity has evolved in a manner that we have a weak state, and the state we have is a low-end state, and you basically rule by this kind of arrangement depending on the regional satraps, which means these centralizing tendencies in Indian polity has been very weak, whereas the tendency towards fragmentation is very strong. And why is that so? I don't know. Maybe it's just what we did in 7000 BCE or 6000 BCE, who knows? Um, Maybe Harappans were a higher end state, but we don't know. We do not know much about the Harappan civilization. But there's something called path dependency. That is, what happened, let's say, in 4000 BCE sets in motion a chain reaction, and the people traveled across that path. Of course, deviating from that path now and then, but the broad spectrum is set. And this is how Indian polity has evolved, that you have very strong regional power centers, and because there was lack of a central unified rule, so you have so much of diversity, differences in institutions, cultures, political thinking, social structures as well, because there was no homogenization done. Homogenization is done by a central power, because regional powers basically cannot follow homogenization policies, and this is very different from the experience of the other parts of the world. And this was so till the Britishers came to India. So the Britishers were the first one who basically tried to create a high-end state in India. So this high-end state in India starts, I would say, with the British rule in India, specifically after 1857. And they brought the entire country under a unified civil service. Lord Macaulay, instituted a uniform legal code for the entire country. For the first time, there was this judicial integration of India. You had the taxation system being implemented. You had, very importantly, census being implemented, and India started becoming a more centralized, a more unified polity. And that led to lots of reaction. I mean, this is not an easy thing to do. If you are a polity which for millennia has, you know, uh, been evolved to value local independence, and if not local independence but local autonomy, then any power trying to do centralization will face heavy resistance. And this task of Centralization was then taken over by the Indian state after 1947. The journey has been quite rough. If you look at the India's history after 1947, we had we did create a strong state which was able to hold on to this part together. But then also it was a weak state because the state capacity was very weak. So even though it was quite high as compared to the pre-modern period, now at least the government sitting in Delhi can execute projects at the grassroots level, control the villages, influence what is happening in the areas which are far off from the capital city. You can frame economic policies for the entire country and which will have impact on the daily lives of the people. But still the state capacity was very limited. One of the reasons was that even this first republic, which was formed in 1947, also dependent upon the cooperation of the local elites. So the Congress rule or the Nehruvian rule, or as we call it, was basically the alliance between the elite upper caste urban Indians with the local dominant feudal elites of the countryside. Very much similar to how India has always been. You know that the deal was simply that the urban elites will do whatever they want to do with their crazy economic ideas, their fancy foreign policy, and they're not going to disturb or disrupt the grassroots level power structure. And the local elites, in this case the agrarian elites, basically jamindars who survived the land reforms, and the dominant sections of the society, dominant caste in the countryside, will do whatever they want to do in the countryside. In return, they will not oppose the overall macro policy of the country, in the sense that we don't care what you're following as the foreign policy. We don't care if you're following a 5-year plan or not. We will deliver you votes in return and you will keep winning the elections. So this is how the Nehru family was always in power from the Amethi Raebareli belt, which is one of the most feudal belts of India even after 7 decades of independence. And but that automatically means that the state power becomes very weak, because then if you have a government, let's say, which wants to implement something at the grassroots level, the local power structure will then either stall it or manipulate it to suit their own interest. So the authority of the state becomes very weak. What I feel, is happening in India today is that the First Republic is collapsing and it is giving way to the Second Republic of India. In what shape, what kind, I don't know. But this is something which is happening, that we are living through the twilight of the First Republic. And that is why this sense of chaos, this sense of uncertainty, this anxiety, perhaps we cannot put a finger on it as to what is happening, but the old structures are giving way to new structures, slowly but definitely. And that is always a chaotic process. That is always a process which is not easy. And what this change is, I think the change is that finally the culmination point of the process which started with the British rule in India is being reached. And that culmination point is that now India will have a high-end state. That is, you will have a state, a unified Indian state, which is powerful enough to impose its will at the local level, which is powerful enough to influence the daily lives of the people, and which is powerful enough to control the borders and the social and political dynamics of the countryside as well. So you see all these things which are coming up, the attempt at taxing people, these tax reforms, GST, and perhaps the income tax reform, trying to widen the taxation net, trying to reform agriculture by bringing it under a unified law, by reforming the what you call the social laws in the country. We have seen triple talaq and so on, by trying to bring in NPR, NRC, which is very important for a high-end state. That, how can you run a modern state when you don't even know who your citizens are? So database is the first thing which a state needs to be effective and strong. So this NPR, NRC thing, this entire thing of taxation reforms, agricultural reforms, labor reforms, the attempt to bring uniform civil code and so on. So this is a process which says that at this juncture of history of India, the forces of centralization are stronger than the forces of fragmentation. So India is moving towards a more united or unified state, and that is threatening the local power centers, that is threatening the local power structures, and that is definitely threatening the regional satraps. And that is why you see this unrest, this anxiety, this chaos, and this allegation that, the democracy is under danger, idea of India is under danger, something bad is happening. We don't know what is happening, but something bad is happening in the country. Well, change is always a traumatic experience, so we don't know how it will unfold in the future. But whether this will succeed or not, we do not know, in the sense that history is never linear. The history, especially Indian history, has been unfortunate in the sense that we have never been able to create a unified, powerful Indian state. But I think we never were able to create that because we always lacked the theory of the state. So look at China. The Chinese state, uh, ever since the time of the Qin dynasty, which was the first imperial dynasty to unify China, has followed this theoretical framework of legalism. So it's not Taoism, it's not Buddhism, Confucian thought, it's certainly not communism. The state ideology of China has always been legalism, pioneered by the Lord Shang, who was one of the advisors of the Qin. And to put it very crudely, the legalism is about, let's say, absolute authority of the state. It's about authority, that the state should be powerful, the state should have monopoly over violence, and the will of the state should be unchallenged. Whereas in India, we do not have any comparable thought. So when you talk about the political thoughts of India, can you think of any other work apart from Charakya's Arthashastra? And that shows that the thing we lacked was a theoretical work, a theoretical, let's say, basis to create a unified high-end state. I think we might succeed this time because this time this theoretical framework is being provided by the Hindutva. Now, Hindutva came into existence, as you know, as an anti-imperialist construct, as it as a challenge to the uh, question thrown up by the colonial rule, where you have to justify your existence as a people, and also it was a response of an ancient civilization to the modern era, which is dominated by the nation and nation states. So we innovated. We came up with this new political construct, Hindutva. Hindutva is Hindu political response to Western imperialism and Islamic imperialism. And this Hindutva has centralizing tendencies, is in the sense that it wants to wield all the Hindus, all the people, all the followers of the indigenous faiths, indigenous pagan traditions into a unified religious community and a unified political community, and to create a modern industrial state based on that sense of nationalism. Now, when I'm talking about unified community, it does not mean a homogeneous community. Well, homogeneity itself is a byproduct of industrialization and urbanization. So as we become more urban and industrial, certainly there will be some degree of homogenization, give and take, which you already see in the big cities of India. But Hindutva per se does not advocate homogenization anymore. I mean, there was a phase when it was in reaction to the Western notions of the nation, nationalism. It also came up as a response, its own idea of who we are, but it has long abandoned those aims. So now Hindutva is more about protecting the India's political independence, territorial integrity, and the demographic status quo of India. But that also provides for a theoretical framework to create a centralized unified state in India. So perhaps this is a process which we are seeing unfolding in before our eyes. what we're seeing is the resistance to it, which is natural because if for millennia you have evolved in a certain manner, any change will definitely generate equally strong backlash. And I think that in the coming decade, we are going to see more such disturbance, more such disruptions as India slowly and steadily becomes a more, you know, modern in the sense that a more modern state and also a unified state and also a high-end state. And this is what I wanted to discuss with you because the purpose of my blog is not to give you the ultimate truth. There are plenty of people out there doing that. But the purpose of my video blog is to throw ideas, is to, discuss the ideas which I have or the observations I am making as to what is happening with the Indian polity. And this idea is also work in progress. So I think going forward, we will be able to develop a more, let's say, unified theory of what is happening in the long-term trajectory of India's political evolution. And this is it, people. I hope to see you next time as well. Thank you for your time. Thank you.